In 2021, UNESCO will provide a GEM report as a mandate to observe the progress of the Sustainable Development Goals on non-state actors in education. A non-state actor provides supplemental education, also commonly known as shadow education, because it mimics mainstream schooling. Non-state actors in education are especially imperative to the comparative and international education community because it presents a debate between the public versus private role in education. The privatization of education, shadow education, supplementary instruction, or private tutoring runs parallel to Sustainable Development Goal 4 of Education 2030. While shadow education is seemingly congruent with the 7 outcome targets and 3 means of implementation for the SDGs 4s, under further scrutiny, shadow education directly and indirectly impacts and undermines the SDG 4's universal agenda of equity and inclusion for all by exacerbating social inequalities and discrimination. The ability, therefore, to afford access to supplemental education is dependent on one's socioeconomic status within their social class position. This study compares the influence of differential access to shadow education systems in the People's Republic of China and the United States, and the nation's progress towards achieving UNESCO's SDG Target 4.5 that ensures by 2030 all levels of education will be accessible to all included vulnerable populations, and how the presence of differential access provided by non-state actors contribute to inequality and the potential lessons that can be learned. The purpose of comparative inquiry is to consider multiple levels of contrasting and similar patterns and trends. Particular attention needs to be given to the context of each subject of comparison. The 2 nations of comparison, the People's Republic of China and the United States of America, were specifically chosen for multiple reasons. First, both nations have rich quantitative and qualitative data on the shadow education industry and a comparatively strong system of education. Second, both nations have deeply embedded systems of stratification that hinder their citizens' upward mobility. And finally, both nations are on opposing sides of the hemisphere and thus are from 2 different worlds, providing a provocative analysis of both positive and negative patterns and trends experienced through documented implications and the potential lessons that can be learned. Mark Bray provides useful categories of grouping countries that are scaled based on patterns of private tutoring worldwide. Such groupings are based on historical data on emergence of tutoring as significant activities, on cultural factors which promote or limit tutoring, and on the nature of links between the shadow system and government education policies. The East Asian Society of China is categorically classified as having a vigorous investment in the shadow education industry, whereas the United States is categorically classified as having a moderate investment in the shadow education industry. Bray explains that these different categories are useful insofar as they may suggest different policy needs. Planners should not assume that action is not needed if the scale is modest. Rather, to the contrary, this may be the time that action is needed on the grounds that prevention of problematic features is better than cure. This premise provides a solid foundation for the comparison of 2 contextually dissimilar countries for the purpose of obviation. UNESCO's Education 2030 SDG 4 declaration frames education on the basis of equal access, equitable, and accessible levels of education on a primary or compulsory basis. Although that is only the starting point, while the government and schools have the duty to provide this starting point, they also have the responsibility to provide a level playing field for all participants, especially students from underprivileged and socioeconomically disenfranchised demographics. Shadow education poses a challenge to SDG 4s and educational fairness because it exacerbates the systematic social stratification by unevenly distributing educational resources among disparate social classes. Among the multiple challenges to achieving the SDG 4s, one of the greatest challenges that will contribute to the growing educational gap and inequality are the complexities in monitoring this non-state actor. The non-state actor, the shadow, has only in recent years been identified by UNESCO to be a major contributor to the educational system, yet the sector has thus gone unregulated. The lack of regulation contributes to the lack of proper data and control, resulting in U.S. industry that is now categorically moderate that may very well spike to categorically vigorous as seen in China. The U.S. shadow education industry is projected to reach $272.9 billion by the year 2025 to the current gains of $112.7 billion, driven by a compounding growth of 7.9%. In order to monitor non-state actors, would need to individually be transparent and open to collaborations and partnerships with the public, educational, and political sector. This may not willingly occur because the portion of the industry that benefits from gains are those who have access and therefore an exclusivity is provided. The alternative part of the industry that assists individuals who need support to catch up is not beneficial nor the mainstream and are typically provided by free services in the public educational sector. Shadow education is greatest among higher socioeconomic groups worldwide and is least among lower income families. It has become a weapon or vehicle of choice on the battleground, leaving those who cannot afford the services to fight on the uneven playing field and directly on the front lines with limited access to weapons or shields. This analogy is a representation of the explicit shadow war created by education systems that hold high stakes for high standardized scores. The academic advantages may lead to higher academic achievement, which ultimately may solidify more work opportunities and strengthen upward mobility. This opportunity, if not afforded to all, contributes to the growing educational gap and inequality. The basis of social justice is educational fairness. Access to a quality education is deemed the single avenue to a better future, upward mobility, and financial security. Consequently, educational access is also a means to maintain social systems, social order, social stratification, and oppression. UNESCO's SDG 4 frameworks were developed in an effort to eradicate these injustices that have historically disproportionately affected the lower-tiered class. Additionally, according to Lucas and Bryan, it does not benefit the social structure nor the economy to provide everyone with access to quality education. The theory of effectively maintaining inequality states that the basic education is generally accessible, yet it is the access to high-quality education that is where the opportunity lies. It is the access to the additional resources that others do not have access to. It is the opportunity to supplement the education with additional strategies and practices that allow an individual to be competitive. It is the inability to afford the access that perpetuates the imbalance in education for all. And it is for these reasons that SDG 4.5 will never fully be achieved. Further research is needed in the comparison of East Asian families and studies who receive private tutoring and East Asian Americans who are in the same socioeconomic categories in order to fully understand the cultural dynamics that contribute to access and further advantage.